on this edition of the Self-Publishing Show.
When we read a book, we don't change the voice in our head depending on the character. This is the difference between an audiobook and, say, an audio drama, which needs voices and is a production. This is a performance, yes, but the performance of the truth of a work.
Publishing is changing. No more gatekeepers. No more barriers. No one standing between you and your readers. Do you want to make a living from your writing? Join indie bestseller Mark Dawson and first-time author James Blatch as they shine a light on the secrets of self-publishing success. This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Show with me, James Blatch.
And me, Mark Dawson. Hello.
Hello. Again, we're recording this a few days before, so we don't know exactly what the situation is on the planet at the moment, but we assume that someone hasn't magically come up with a vaccine and we're all getting closer and closer to the peak. And certainly where we are in the UK, they're talking about May being the peak, if they can keep it under wraps. The US, I think, is probably on a similar path. And during this time, things are, in some cases, completely turned upside down. So if you work for an airline, everything's turned upside down. Other industries are busier. If you work at a supermarket somewhere, you're probably busier than ever before. Anyone with kids, life is very, there's a lot of upheaval. So we can have a little chat about adapting to those circumstances right at the beginning. And then we have an episode with Joanna Penn about audiobooks. Now, this is actually a good time, I think, to look at your backlist, to look at your inventory and work out if you're maximizing your income from them, and audiobooks, translations, those sorts of things. Understanding them more thoroughly, understanding the pathways open to you, the investment decisions that you make at the beginning is a very important part of that. Perfect time, is it not, Mark, to learn all that stuff?
It is, and it's not just audiobooks, it's audio for authors, so she covers tons of things in the book. Audiobooks is a pretty important one, but there are other things that authors might want to think about, things like voice search, podcasts, all kinds of content like that. Just with the connective tissue between it is that it all uses, a voice or sound or things like that. So, yeah, definitely a book that I would recommend, and an interview that people will enjoy today.
Yeah, so we've got that coming up. We also had an episode just a few weeks ago, actually, just as this was starting, and coincidentally, really, with Emma Prince, who talked about her experience of becoming pregnant and knowing that there was going to be a period of time when she was distracted, is not quite the word, but focused on other things away from her career. And she was worried about her income during that period. So she talked about how she planned for that and how she coped with that. So that's a very apposite episode. I think it's about 3 episodes ago, Emma Prince. Look out for that one. So one thing to ask, Mark, we're in the early stages, I think, of the sort of lockdown phase. We are getting close to, I'm in isolation at the moment. It won't be long before most people you talk to, one way or another, are restricting their movements quite severely. And as we enter that phase, are you seeing any significant changes in sales?
I had a little bit of a dip. It's been a little bit weird because I had a new book out about 3 days ago, the Monday of this week, as we record this, which has skewed things a bit because it's been a very good launch. But I had seen a bit of a dip. I had the lowest day I think I've had all year, about a week ago, and you kind of think about that, and I don't think it's surprising. At the moment, people aren't reading fiction. I think at the moment, as we said last week, there's kind of a sense of what the F is going on, and we need to educate ourselves. And also, it's very difficult not to read the news, even though it's probably not the best thing for our psychological health to just obsess about it. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody, probably more guilty than that than some people, in that I'm in the news all the time to find, and not in the news, but I'm reading the news all the time about what's going on. And I think with that, people aren't necessarily buying books, and they're probably not they're not reading on subscriptions with KU either. So I had a dip, but that will pass. So I'm pretty confident that the way this will look in maybe as this goes out, or certainly as we progress into the spring and then summer, is that people are going to want distraction, and they're not going to be able to go to the cinema. Cinemas are all closed in the UK and probably will be closed everywhere now, so that's not possible. You'll find, I know that I saw today, the government or someone had basically told Netflix you might want to switch off your HD option because demand on their servers has gone through the roof as people are at home watching telly. But not everyone will want to do that. Maybe not everyone will be able to go online at a speed that means they can download stuff, and they're going to want distraction. And a very good way to do that is reading. And then it gets better for us because Amazon are not taking third-party products. That means they are cutting down on things like physical books. But I wonder how many Kindles they sold last week. Probably quite a lot of them. And those Kindles are going to want to be fed. They're going to want content. And the beauty of digital publishing is that there is no physical item. There is no virus to catch as a courier comes to your house with a book. It's press a button and it magically appears on your device within seconds.
Through the whole process, we don't have to rely on any physical.
No, we do nothing. It's seamless. It's absolutely seamless. So it's potentially, I can't think of many better industries that are suited to take advantage of a pretty shitty time. And that we are in a good space to do that. So it's a question of, I would say, significantly increased demand, and not affected by the distribution and supply chains being screwed up by drivers being sick, that kind of thing. So I think it's, as we record this, I'm not optimistic about a lot of things, but I am quite optimistic about the fact that people will be buying books in the medium term.
Yeah, and I was thinking about genres, which genres are going to do well, and I think you do have to go forward in
What's
time.
number one at the moment? Have you seen?
Well, yes, in the UK it was LJ Ross yesterday.
Not anymore, unless she's come back to the topic, which she probably has. But I mean, I'll tell you, it's Dean Koontz's The Eyes of Tomorrow, which is the book from the 80s where he somehow coincidentally predicted a virus coming from Wuhan. It's pretty nutty how that's happened, but it's happened before. I mean, Tom Clancy wrote about a kind of a 9/11 situation years before that happened too. So it's just one of those things of just weird coincidence. But he went to number one. So and what was, I mean, Contagion is the film Contagion is very high in the Netflix charts at the moment. I mean, for me personally, what on earth are people doing? I wouldn't want to watch that right now.
John Dyer watched it a couple of days ago. It's a great film.
He's
but
weird.
It
is a great film.
I remember I actually classified it when we worked at the BBFC, and I remember thinking, what a grim film. I really enjoyed it. It's a grim watch and a quite unsettling film to watch. I think at the moment it must be a heightened experience.
I wouldn't be watching it. I mean, people like that. I mean, people like horror. They like that genre because people like to scare themselves. But they're usually, when you're looking at that kind of stuff, there's usually, you can kind of say it's just a book, or it's just a film, or whatever it is.
So, I know that's happening outside.
It is.
But what we need to do is to project ourselves to the back end of this. So at some point, midsummer, hopefully, if things go as they're sort of planning it at the moment, trying to plan it, there'll be a downslope. And I think it'll be a really significant day because we will have had 4 months of that number rising every day. And there'll be a significant point where we have fewer cases one day. And maybe there'll be some false moments there, but eventually that line will start coming down. And I think that feeling at that point, John Dyer summed it up as he thinks there's going to be the mother of all parties. It's going to be that atmosphere. People are going to want to get on with it. Governments will want you to start flying again, going on holiday. They will want you to go back to work, obviously, for the economy and all the rest of it. And I think people will feel different. They might not. They won't want to watch Contagion at that point. They might want to watch it now. For some people, weird people. At that point, I think you're into your beach reads. I think your romances, your slightly happier, or whatever particular fantasy, more sort of escapism reads. I think they're going to do well. So in fact, that does cover most genres. That's what most people write, a book that people can get lost in, a murder mystery, or whatever. In your case. So that's something to consider, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not a bad industry to be in, and as I said last week, this is a good opportunity to kind of get stuck in and write some new stuff, get your first book out there, or finish a trilogy or start something new, learn how to market, all the kinds of things that we need to do. It's a really good time to do that now. And also, I'm starting to see, just talking about marketing, I'm starting to see Facebook ads now clearly well targeted, but looking at parents, I'm seeing things like lesson plans for kids, activity boxes. There's a line on that. There's a very fine line in terms of how you message that, because on the one hand, you don't want to be kind of seen to be profiting from an unsettling situation, but on the other hand, parents need things to do for their kids, and that could be a pretty good way of doing it. So it's one of those. I haven't seen any ads yet, I don't think, from authors saying, you're stuck in your house for the next 6 months. Lucky you. I've got a great new book for you. I haven't seen anyone doing that, but I bet it's a matter of time. I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, because I think that's a pretty surefire way of getting lots of bad reviews and a lot of negative comments on your ad. But someone will try it.
I've bought your book.
Oh, thank you very much. Which one? I've got about 35. Which?
I know you have. Your new one. Your
Atticus.
Yes. Cabin in the Woods, whatever it is.
It's going well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thanks to me.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that, because that's a good, well written mystery, police procedure, and I'll obviously be the judge of that when I finished it. Is a perfect thing to get in. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you are. Is a perfect thing to get into. I tell you who's doing well. J.K. Rowling's doing very well at the moment.
Yeah,
Harry Potter books are suddenly back at the top of the charts again.
Comforting, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, yeah, but it is interesting. Okay, so good time to. If you do have that time, and funnily enough, I don't at the moment. I don't know about you, but it's actually really busy for us. I guess we're trying to. We run our own company, so I guess the people at the top of every company are actually doubly busy at the moment. But lots of employees, for obvious reasons, are the ones who may have some more time, if you're lucky or unlucky, at this stage. But I know a lot of people will be in a position where they've got some hours back in their lives, nothing else to do, and this is a great opportunity to learn new things. Which does, I guess, bring us on to today's guest, which is Jo Penn, who's always a great person to go to inspire you to not leave any money on the table, to explore new avenues and opportunities. She did a great presentation at our London conference.
Yeah, something about that quite funny. We did a little survey to people after the event, and it was like loads of questions, because we want to make it better next year if we do it again. And one of the questions was, what was your favourite session? And Jo, the last time I looked, was twice as popular as me, which is so she definitely can't come next year. I'm forbidding it.
Yeah, but her session was on multiple streams of income for authors, and obviously a very apposite theme at the moment. You can watch the session, by the way, in its entirety if you go to selfpublishingformula.com/digital and sign up for a digital ticket for the conference. They'll be available. I think we'll keep them open probably until they become irrelevant, which will be next year, hopefully, when we do our follow-up. Okay, so let's move on to that interview with Jo about her new book, Audio and Authors. She gives out the name of the book in the interview, but I'll get it ready for you off the back end of the chat.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Jo Penn, I take it that settling down and smiling at the camera means you're ready.
Yes.
That's the cue. You suddenly stopped looking anxiously at your screen and went, smiled.
Yeah, I thought you were ready.
I'm ready. I'm always ready.
You're ready.
Welcome back to the Self-Publishing Show. One of our very, very first. You might have been the first. Were you the first?
I don't think so. But
you
no,
weren't
thank
far
you.
off.
Oh, well, thank you. I always enjoy coming on and chatting to you and saying hi to everyone.
You are the queen of self-publishing podcasts anyway. Can we say queen anymore? Do I have to say non-specific gender person of podcasts? The king, the monarch, the monarch, I can say.
The monarch. I'm pretty happy to be queen. I'm not too fussy on my pronouns.
I'm just checking. Great. Well, look, it's really lovely to have you on the show again. I love chatting to you. We don't see each other enough, really. It's at conferences and stuff, isn't it? But it's always a bit of a fillip talking to you, and I think also a dose of reality, because I think you are very grounded in publishing, and normally a quick conversation with you is a point where things that I briefly get excited about are quickly dismissed by you, or the other way around. This is what you should be thinking about, and I think that's why people tune into you, because you have your ear to the ground and you know what's coming.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And do you know, I've been reflecting on this because I've recently been doing an overhaul of my website, which is it's sort of 11 years old now. And what I've discovered in cleaning up the old posts and articles and things, and even podcast interviews, is how many people have disappeared over the last decade, how many books have disappeared, how many authors have disappeared, how many businesses have gone, you know, things that I reported on back in the day, like, you know, a decade ago, don't exist anymore. You know, hilariously for our discussion today, sort of video books or books were trendy sort of back in, you know, 2002. And so it's been a very interesting exercise. So I think when I hope I don't sound dismissive of some things, but I've seen so many things come and go now that I think I've developed a bit of an antenna for what might stick around. Because look, let's be honest, we're all busy. So there's no point getting excited or jumping into things that you don't think are going to last. So I think I'm quite careful, but also quite excited about new things.
Yeah, I think your antenna works. Vooks just reminds me of what we would remember as Jackanory. That was a Vook. Jackanory was a children's program in the evening, and when we were young in Britain, when some B-list celebrity read a book. It was wonderful, actually.
Yeah,
But,
no, this was an actual company, and they it was more like the apps, you know, when you downloaded an app and it had some video and some text. It was kind of enhanced ebooks.
Oh, I see.
But I mean, even our discussion today about audio for authors, I almost think that now audio is enhanced ebooks in a way. I think we're moving into this.
Yeah.
The enhancement is more about audio than it is about video.
Yeah, the expressions and stuff that you don't get when you're reading. Although part of the magic of reading is that you bring that yourself, don't you? That's why audiobooks are a slightly different thing, which is what we're going to talk about today. So yes, you've been busy, because you're always busy, but you've been busy in the non-fiction world as well as your fiction business. A couple of books over the last couple of years. I think last time we spoke may have been about sleep and
The healthy writer.
Yes, and diet and so on. And I did cut sugar out of my coffee as a result of that, which is that has stuck because you told me I was going to get Alzheimer's. And oh yeah, look, briefly forgot something, so I should have cut out sugar earlier. And now you're on audiobooks. Now I'm really interested in this because I don't know how much I've spoken to you about this, but Mark and I have started our publishing empire. We are now magnates in that sense. We signed our first author. I'm the person looking after the shop, so I'm in the back end of KDP the whole time and planning out the year. And of course, there are a number of things on that horizon. And it's a big question for us. We have a 6-book series. So it's not going to be cheap. A big question for us is audiobooks. So I'm going to be paying really close attention to this. We'll talk about when it's the right time, as well as some of the practicals. And what did you set out to do with the book? Is this like a one-stop guide for an author about the whole ins and outs of audiobooks?
Yes, and look, I've been podcasting, you know, since 2009, and I had a YouTube channel 2008. So I feel like I've been doing this a long time. And then what happened in 2019? A couple of things happened. So one, the big news in probably the last 4 years has been audiobooks, but it's 7 years of double-digit growth in audiobooks. So it is the biggest segment, the fastest growing segment in publishing. So it's the one to watch. But then also what happened was podcasting. I went to Podcast Movement in Orlando, and what I realized, the tipping point for podcasting, some people said was Serial back in 2015, but in 2019 the money really came in, and also the stats were around 55% of Americans over the age of 12 are now listening to podcasts, and it's something like 17 hours a week that people are listening. So that was another thing. And then I also found my own behavior had changed in terms of reading. So for about a decade, I've been mainly Kindle and sometimes print. And what's happened is I've shifted quite dramatically to mostly audio. I don't read blogs anymore. I listen to podcasts, and I mostly listen to audiobooks on 1.5 speed instead of reading nonfiction. Particularly, I read most nonfiction in audio, and then I read some fiction as well. So all of those things kind of came together, plus the number of questions that people ask. You guys know this. I was getting more and more questions from authors about audiobooks and podcasting. Plus, I also trained and did some coaching around voice narration. So I'm actually an audiobook narrator now. I do my own books. So all of these things together, plus my love of AI, which I'm sure we'll come to, artificial intelligence. So I've got a voice double now, an AI voice double. There's lots of things happening in that area. So all these things came together, and I was like, okay, I really have to write a book. And this is how many of us write nonfiction is we learn a lot and then we think, oh, I should put that down somewhere so I understand it. And the best way to sort of help yourself is to teach others, as you guys know. So I did the book. It's out beginning of March 2020. And of course, I have self-narrated the audio. So that's kind of the genesis of the book. But I just feel like there's a big tipping point for audio. And we're probably at not the very beginning, but we're probably in the early days.
Okay. I've got a few questions as a result of that. You mentioned podcast money began the sort of year after Serial. Is podcast, because we use podcasting for lead generation effectively, if we're honest about it. This is, it's an absolutely massive amount of slog and hard work, but it's a very important part of our business to be seen and also for us to learn and talk to people like you so we know what we're talking about. But we don't make money from it in that sense. There's we've never taken sponsorship. And we occasionally do get offered sponsorship, but when I look at it, it's not really enough for us to take for the...
You do have a Patreon though.
We have a Patreon, yeah, we do. And that's probably about $10,000 a year, maybe £10,000 actually a year, which is not bad. Is that where the money is going into podcasting? Or is there... people like Adam Buxton do, a very popular podcast in the UK, does sponsorship. I don't know whether that's ever going to pay a lot.
Yes, well, like self-publishing, like being an author, the top percentage of podcasters make serious amounts of money, and then there's a scattering at the next level. Most podcasters, like most authors, will not make much money, and again, it depends why you're doing it. So you're right, like SPF is mainly as lead gen and serving the community. My podcast I started just so I could have some friends. But over time since 2015, I've monetized with ads, with Patreon, with indirect sales, all of those things. But what happened in 2019 is it's something like over $1 billion in advertising came into podcasting. We saw Spotify, who've said we are going to own podcasts. We saw the rise of all these new podcast networks, and podcast fiction has become a thing. The series that there's a lot of creative shops now doing straight to podcasts episodes that are getting picked up for TV. Law is an interesting one. The Law podcast started as a podcast, became books, became a Netflix or Amazon Prime.
Yeah, so well produced. It was the earliest one I listened to that was really properly produced and sounded lovely.
Oh, it's seriously properly produced. So what's happened I think similar to the independent author movement, started out as really, when I started podcasting, it wasn't really called podcasting. It was like downloadable audio that you got somehow to a device and put in that tape connector to your car back in the days of tapes, but then it's become more and more professional, and now to stand out in the market, things do have to be a bit more professional. There's definitely still room for every kind of voice, but there's also these really big name companies coming in. And what got me, this is hilarious because again this happens to indie authors, so I'm at Podcast Movement and I'm sitting there and this producer network person comes up and hands me a card and says, "So are you looking for a network?" And I was like, no, actually, I'm an independent podcaster. And it became very obvious that it's like the publishing industry and that there are big companies with big budgets, big production teams owning the audio IP, the intellectual property. And this is my hobby horse, obviously, because we are independents and owning our IP is part of how we make a living. So I'm an independent podcaster. You guys are independent podcasters. We are not on a network. We are not being paid a salary by a network, and they don't own our content. So that was another sort of thing in my head. I saw the industry is shifting to grabbing IP, and places are creating more and more of their own content. We're seeing this obviously in TV with more of the services creating their own content and taking them off the distributors. So yeah, we're in a sort of IP creation moment.
All about the content. I do remember a big organisation. I worked for the BBC for a while, and when the digital revolution happened, they briefly thought it was all about channels. So they started creating all these channels everywhere, and it took about 2 years before they realized it's all about content. It doesn't really matter how you deliver the channels, and they started to go back on that. But we've been through this wave. Okay, let's talk about audiobooks then. So interestingly, you say that we're in the infancy of this because it feels quite well developed at the moment, and there's some fairly clear routes that people can take at the moment. Why don't we spell those out to somebody who's perhaps not gone through the process yet?
Yeah, well, you can say it's quite developed if you're in the US market. I mean, which is where a lot of us concentrate our time. Let's say the US English-speaking market, in fact, because even if you look at Spanish language audiobooks in the US, it's very underserved. So I went to the Frankfurt Audiobook Summit when was that? September 2019, and listened to everyone talking about this. So basically, for indies, the route to market, if you are in the US, the UK, Canada, and Ireland, I think are the only countries. You can use acx.com, which is Amazon's service. But if you're anywhere else, you can also use findawayvoices.com, which is what I use. There are lots of services, but those are the ones I use, and I use them together. And if you are a proponent of wide publishing, which of course I am, we've talked about this before, then you can do both. So I upload to ACX and I sign a non-exclusive contract with ACX, and then I go to Findaway and also non-exclusive. Findaway is non-exclusive. And what is awesome about Findaway, and this is so important, is libraries. The library market for audio is very exciting. Also with Findaway, you can reach the markets that are outside the realm of Audible. Storytel is a hugely exciting service that is basically eating up all the other countries that Audible is not in right now or is not dominant in. So that's exciting. So if you're wide with audio, you can end up with revenues from all over the world. And get this with libraries. Okay, this is a little marketing tip too. So you can say to your readers and your listeners, hey, you can get my audiobooks for free at your library. Just go in and ask. And then for the library, they can do a pay per checkout fee, or and then you get paid basically. So it's better for the library, it's better for you, and it's better for the patrons. And also, as we know right now, there are some issues between big publishing and libraries. So this is a really good moment for indies to go for libraries. So those are the main routes. Whether you're exclusive or not, there are pros and cons as ever with going exclusive or wide. Personally, we can talk about marketing if you like, but if you have any form of international marketing, then you should be wide, because how else are you going to sell to customers in all those markets unless you are everywhere?
So ACX is the equivalent of Kindle Unlimited. Is it still called that?
Yes.
Everything changes, but
no, well, it's not that you can go non-exclusive. So
you can be non-exclusive in ACX.
Yes.
Okay. So this is some of the detail that I'm not clear about, which I think is worth spelling out, because not everybody will be familiar with this. So the choice between ACX and Findaway, for instance, if you could be non-exclusive with ACX, why would you choose Findaway? What are the advantages, disadvantages?
Well, that's why I do both. You can just use Findaway, and they have some benefits there. For example, I believe their Voices Share program, which is where you can do a joint venture basically with a narrator. I think you have to be not exclusive with them, but they are a distributor through to about 24 different retailers. One of the huge benefits of Findaway is they allow you to set your price, which of course you cannot do on ACX. And many authors are very shocked about this. They're like, where's the price field? It's like, well, there isn't one.
It's a subscription, isn't it, through Amazon for the readers?
It's based on you can get a credit for the subscription, but it's also based on the length of the audiobook. And this is another little a little tip. If you have short fiction, it can be difficult to shift on ACX, but with Findaway, it's quite interesting because you can do a 99-cent thing with a cheap audio. And with non-fiction, I have found that it doesn't really matter, that people will either buy the non-fiction or they'll use their credit, because non-fiction listeners are less price sensitive than fiction. So there's lots of pros and cons around that. But pricing, we're so used to as indie authors with ebooks and print books for sorting out our pricing and being in control, but you can't do that with ACX. So as I said, I go with ACX and I click the non-exclusive button, and then I go and also publish on Findaway. And that gives me, I feel, the greatest control. You can get to it to ACX or to Audible and iTunes through Findaway as well. So I don't want it to sound too complicated to people. I mean, obviously there are lots of other options, including licensing your audiobook to a great audio service. I know Mark has signed audio deals with Audible particularly. Obviously that means those properties IPs are exclusive to the Audible environment, which means they're not globally available. They're not available in libraries, but I'm sure he got a good chunk of cash. So you just have to decide what's right for you, what's right for your author journey, I guess.
And when you say you do both ACX and Findaway, so at what point is the production done, and who does that?
Well, that depends on what you decide. So you can, with ACX and Findaway, work with a professional narrator. Both services can help you find a narrator, or you can take auditions. You can find them separately. So I have previously worked separately with producers and then got the finished files and then uploaded them myself. The main thing is the control of the IP asset. And this is really important with audio, because actually, if you do a separate contract, I mean, generally the contracts with those services cover it. But if you do a private agreement, you need to make sure you are assigned the audio production copyright. You know about this. You've come out on the BBC. What's interesting is how many narrators, for example, don't own the recordings of their voices because the production copyright belongs to, say, the BBC or whoever. So it's very important that you get that copyright assigned, or you may come into hit issues later on. So that's just a little tip on IP, because what's interesting with audio is that IP, the intellectual property and the copyright, is not just in the copy of the book, it's also in the recording. So those are really, and also the cover. This is another thing. If let's say you're traditionally published in ebook and print format, but you haven't licensed your audiobook and you want to go and do that yourself, you don't have the rights to that book cover. You have to sort out your own book cover, or you may negotiate with the publisher to have the right to do an audiobook cover. But the intellectual property considerations with audiobooks and podcasting are super important. And I believe these are the things that are going to come up more and more around the ownership of IP over time.
So IP used to be something that was the domain of bigger organizations and corporations, and now we're moving into an area where you and I need to understand this.
Well, we always have been as independent authors, as authors, copyright is our business. And what's kind of crazy, especially with audiobooks, is many people listening, if they are traditionally published, may well have already signed away their audio rights in a standard contract, which would have said all rights for the term of copyright, which is 70 years after your death, basically. So unless you have a clause which, specifically excludes audiobooks, or you can negotiate that, or there's a rights reversion if they haven't actually done it, then you may not own your audio rights. So this is really a big deal in an age where, and we can move into the AI section, but as it becomes more and more easy and cheap to create multiple audio versions of your book, if you don't own the rights to do that with your own work, you will be very angry with yourself. And this is one of the interesting things with IP and copyright in general. Like, a lot of people listening have been traditionally published and may have, for example, got their books into print in Australia because they didn't license that right. So part of our job, I think, is educating people around intellectual property.
Yeah. More and more stuff that we need to understand and be on top of. And ultimately, probably pay some lawyers at some point as well, which is something we increasingly are doing in our business.
Well, I was going to say, if you're actually going to publish people, you better be on top of this stuff, because this is where I feel like this is why I deliberately do not publish people. The line between being a rights holder as a publisher and as an author, you can actually see the conflict. I have considered this myself and then looked at the contract and gone, okay, my role as a publisher is to take as much as I can, and my role as an author is to keep as much as I can. And that's why there is conflict between authors and publishers when it comes to the publishing industry. And yes, we do need to understand these things in order to protect ourselves against the future. So, for example, I saw a contract the other week that said, for all formats existing now and to be created in the future. I was like, whoa, that is just mean.
Yeah. So if we start being able to transmit books between our thought patterns, they'll already have that.
Yes, well, Facebook's working on that.
Yeah, of course they are. Yes, well, this is all because partly J.K. Rowling, who in the very early days of signing her contracts kept the ebooks, because in those days ebooks were science fiction to the publishers, didn't really see the what was ahead in the future. And wow, that's a decision that's earned her billions, and,
yes,
and cost somebody in the publishing industry billions.
Oh, indeed. And Pottermore, her company is, founded off the back of those ebook rights. But I think, that's important for people. What I'd also want people to think about is audio first creation. So we're moving into this period where it's not just about taking a book and then having it narrated. Like, I've just listened to World War Z. We say Z. The Americans
Z,
listening would
yeah.
know it as World War Z.
Yeah.
But the book, have you read the book?
I haven't. I've seen the film, but not read the book.
So it's nothing like the film. The film is not like the book. The book is an oral history of the zombie war, and each chapter is written from a different point of view. And the audiobook is superb. I mean, I've read the book, seen the movie, but the audiobook is another thing of beauty because every chapter is narrated by a different voice with a different accent, which really just grounds you in this book. And it's got me very excited around audio creation, especially with the potential of licensing AI voices that are human-like. If we can create these the things that people are downloading from Audible that at the moment are out of our reach as independents because it's just too expensive. You know, you come from the BBC. These productions are huge. These actors are famous. But if you can license voices, if you can have easier tools to create, I think we could be on the cusp of this sort of audio boom of creation that goes way beyond just the narration of a straight book. And we already have it with a lot of people kind of going off script or creating Audible original dramas and, you know, multicast things. But I'm very excited to see where this goes. And I want people to start considering, hey, maybe that screenplay I've got in my drawer, like I have a few, maybe I'd turn that into an audio drama. Or, you know, think about, or performance poetry, these types of things. Like Kate Tempest, I've got one of her audiobooks, which, you know, should just be a performance poetry reading. It can be more than just the reading of your book. So I want to excite people around the creative possibility as well as the money, obviously.
Of course. So are you thinking at this stage, if you turn your mind back to your fiction business, are you thinking about audiobooks at the planning stage, the plotting stage of your book?
Well, that's a really good question because there's two angles here. Writing for audio is very different to writing for reading. So one of the things that people say when you're writing is, oh, just use the word said, you know, said James, said Joe, because the word said disappears to the reader, and it does on a page, on a printed page or an ebook page. We skip over said, but in an audiobook, that word appears over and over again, and repeated sounds are the biggest issue with audio fiction that I have found, both in my own work and also listening to other audiobooks. I'm like, oh, that really needed editing for audio. And I think this is a gap in the market that I see coming, is editing for audio, because as I go through my own work, I'm re-editing because I'm now reading it out loud. And it's fascinating, the things that you don't notice, your proofreader doesn't notice, that actually is not grammatically wrong or wrong in any way. It just sounds...
Does it sound right? Yeah.
It just sounds a bit off. And again, you know, you're from this production area, but it's incredible once you begin to hear things, you're like, oh, that would sound better if it was like this. I think this will be a renaissance for our writing beauty, because it will make us more, not more literary, I don't mean in that way, I just mean better for sound. And at the end of the day, we've been oral storytellers for much longer than written storytellers. So that's why that's exciting. Then in terms of my own fiction, I've narrated a couple of my short stories, and for those I did re-edit completely. It was, I mean, dialogue, for example, I did read dialogue out loud in an edit, but I didn't perform it. So this is the training I've been having around performance of fiction. And it's just very exciting. And I'm not saying that everyone should do this, obviously, and I may not even narrate my full-length fiction books. I'm still debating that because it's such a big deal. But I think it's a really good way to sort of learn. But I'm definitely looking at my screenplays. I'm definitely looking at adapting my some of my books into audio dramas. For example, for Audible, you can pitch Audible directly with an audio script. Plus, I also know quite a few people within the BBC and things. The hunger for audio projects right now is huge. So I think that's another area that people could think about. So
going back a little bit to somebody getting their own book into an audio, they're obviously now thinking about this edit and yes, another mountain of editing that needs to go on, but let's throw that in there. I'm still curious about how you go about the production stage if you're going to go, for instance, with ACX and Findaway the way you are, because if you've gone into a share on one of those platforms, is that audio production then yours to use elsewhere?
No, you can't share on both platforms. You can only share on one. So if you go into ACX and do a royalty split deal, you can't put it on Findaway.
It's there.
It's exclusive.
So you'd have the other thing
versa.
is upfront payment for somebody where effectively they're paid as a performer and copyright and everything, is you're not licensing that to anyone apart from when you do.
Well, you're licensing. Say if you do a royalty split deal with ACX, you're licensing it to ACX for exclusive rights for 7 years, and the royalty will be split between you and the narrator. So, for example, I'm just coming up on my first 7-year contracts with people I did 7 years ago.
Okay.
And this year, so those books will then be assigned to me alone, and I can come out of that contract and I can put those books wide as soon as they have finished that contract. The other thing is if you pay outright, you can take it out of exclusive after a year. So there are lots of things that they are doing to make this easier, I think.
Okay. And how much does this cost if you're going to do it up front?
As long as a piece of string, really, because if you do royalty split, it doesn't cost you anything because the narrator is basically doing it for free in exchange for royalty share for 7 years. And that royalty share is different on ACX than it is on Findaway. On Findaway, you can also buy them out early, so that also can be attractive.
Forcibly buy them out early, or only if they agree?
Oh, if they agree, or you've agreed a price up front.
Okay.
Because obviously the narrator wants to be paid for their time. So this is the thing. If you're hiring a narrator outright, so I've just hired a German narrator for one of my German audiobooks. She's $400 per finished hour of audio. So it's about 9,000 words per hour, basically, of audio. So, but usually the cost is between, say, $200 and $600 per finished hour of audio. But then, of course, if you do a royalty split, then that can be there. The problem with royalty split, I would say at this point, is that the top narrators have all the choice in the world. So why would they work on your book? It might be good to take a chance on a new narrator, since presumably if you're doing a royalty split, you are a new author, as I was 7 years ago. Getting in there, I was like, well, I don't know about this. I guess I'll do a royalty split deal. Now I don't. I pay outright. But yeah, I think you can also do it yourself. And obviously in my book, Audio for Authors, there's lots of tips on how to do that. If you're writing nonfiction, if you're writing short nonfiction or short stories, there's really nothing stopping you except you, and it will generally be because you're uncomfortable with yourself or your voice in some way, which you can get over if you are motivated. And what the beauty is with owning it in that way is that a year later you can always re-record it if you want to, and re-upload it, or you can get another edit done and do it again, another version. And I love having I have an audio booth here in my my room, so I think once you learn to love it, you can do all these different things, and then the cost is mastering. So I don't do my own mastering, I do my own editing, which for me is just highlighting stuff and pressing delete with all the mistakes, and then I have a professional do the mastering. So it's a lot cheaper to do it yourself, but obviously it takes time. You might have to hire a studio. So I guess the point is there are a lot of options. There are many, 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 many options. What you have to consider as an author listening is it the right time for me to do audio? And if you are a brand new author and you're working on your first book and you haven't sold any copies, or maybe your book has just come out and it still hasn't sold many copies and you've not even broken even, then don't even worry about it. What I would do is say, once you have some money to reinvest, then consider audio. Or if you can do a royalty split deal, then go for it. But what I don't want to see is people saying, Joanna Penn said I should do audiobooks. When what I'm saying is it has to be at the right point in your journey to do this. So Audio for Authors, I'm launching with ebook, paperback, large print, hardback, audiobook, all at the same time. That's 5 formats on launch day. Most authors don't do that. Most traditionally published authors don't do that. But that's because I've been doing it a long time. But if you're brand new, then sure, start with the ebook, do your print on demand, paperback, and then look at audio down the track. Or if you're doing short stories, then, give it a go because it won't cost you much, or you could do it yourself. I hope, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So the mastering process, I guess you go into detail in the books about this. So, for instance, even if you're not going to do it yourself.
I don't, because I outsource it.
Okay. But you explain what it is. When you say mastering, I mean, there's the editing, as you say, putting together, I did read once the sort of format they want, putting together the chunks of audio in sort of chapter format, and then mastering, is that what? Filtering? What happens to mastering?
Yeah, so basically, I can't tell you the technical details, but basically the services have a whole list of technical specifications that if you have to have the files with those technical specifications, and sound people will understand it. Also, there's a really good book. If you want to do it yourself, you can. There's a really good book by M.L. Buckman, B-U-C-H, Matt Buckman. I think it's called How to Narrate Your Audiobook or something like that. It's his only one on audiobooks, but he masters himself, and that book contains the mastering stuff.
I would definitely want to do the mastering myself. I love all that stuff.
Oh yeah, well you come from this world. Personally, I'm too busy starting on the next book, and I think a lot of people might even feel that way around narration, but I love the narration process. The other thing with narration, let's talk about it from a different perspective other than cost, is relationship. So people listening to our voices, people know our voices if they listen to our podcast, right? The same with audiobooks. I've had a lot of comments from people who love listening to me read the audiobook because they know my voice. They want my voice to be the one reading my words. And I love listening to authors who narrate their own audiobooks, particularly non-fiction. And there is some fiction. Neil Gaiman is a classic. Scott Sigler, who I just love. So there are authors who do this, but it's certainly a lot less in fiction than it is in non-fiction.
Yeah. When you narrate, so many years ago, a friend of mine who was a novelist asked me to narrate his audiobook. But then I think Dawson worked out there was another way of doing it and went on. But this was right in the infancy. And he said to me, you used to be on the BBC, narrate my audiobook. And he gave me his first indie book, The Black Mile. And I started to narrate it in my little booth at home. And I felt very underconfident about it because I can read the news and I can stand and do that. And I can, because that's a bit of acting really, looking like you know what you're talking about. But I felt really underconfident about doing voices and characters. Couldn't do it. Didn't want to do it.
Well, the interesting thing with this is there are two styles of reading fiction, and one is to do voices, and very few people do that well. Obviously, Miriam Margolyes would be one of the
Martin
greats.
Jarvis, I think, does it?
Yeah, fantastic. But even most actors can't do every accent, and many of us who, like, I write books with characters from all over the world, and if it's the moment you get one accent wrong, the whole fictive dream falls apart. So there are people who specialise in voices, and there are people who specialise in storytelling. And that's the kind of narrator that I've been learning to be, which is you don't do voices like this person is Irish, now I try an Irish accent, and
the
this
other
person's
gender.
American.
Because you're reading men's voices and I was reading women's voices again.
Yes, exactly. So what you do is, when we read a book, we don't change the voice in our head depending on the character. This is the difference between an audiobook and, say, an audio drama, which needs voices and is a production. This is a performance, yes, but the performance of the truth of a work. So, the short stories I've narrated, some of them are male characters and I'm reading them in my voice, but you should get the sense of a male character because of my writing. And that's where why audio really makes us better writers, because you have to consider the future, how people are going to consume it. But yeah, so I would say if people listening are interested in doing fiction, think about the storytelling angle rather than the accent angle, because as you say, that's just gonna kill it.
Yeah. Well, which brings us on to the robots, who, according to Futurama, are going to kill all humans, but according to you, are going to be our friends. So are we getting to the point now where we can upload our Word document to a computer and a voice good enough for us to listen to will start narrating?
We are already there, definitely. Amazon, obviously, Amazon Polly is the Amazon product that you can plug into your website. Microsoft Baidu, the Chinese one, takes 3.7 seconds of audio to clone a voice. I mean, there are. I know some people listening will doubt this, but this technology gets better every single day. And the number of voices, the number of dialects are increasing more and more and more. And this was actually the last chapter of the book that I was editing it right up to the wire, because it was the last chapter I had to narrate for the audiobook. And I was like, oh, I just one last thing, because every day the news changes. But basically, there's one angle, which is, yes, there are, let's say, 50 voices that you can license from the Google Cloud to do this type of thing. But the big issue with audiobooks is at the moment you cannot use an AI voice in your audiobook. So even though the technology is available, it's not perfect, and also the stores don't allow it. But what we have is a number of companies right now. So my voice double has been made by Descript, Descript.com, and if people are interested, you can go to thecreativepenn.com/voice double and hear some examples of my voice. The aim being that within a couple of years, you'll be able to license voices. So if you want me to read your audiobook, you could license my voice. Or if people want your voice to read their book, they could license your voice, and we would get some kind of micro payment through the blockchain, obviously.
I've got my Bitcoin somewhere.
Yeah, but the other thing that is, I think, the potential is what I see as a consumer, right? So I listen to a lot of business books, and most of these business audiobooks are narrated by American men, American white male voices. And look, that's fine, but what if I would like an English white female voice? Or what if I want, a Nigerian male? What if I want an Indian voice? What if everybody wants their own dialect? And if we think that somebody connects with our work with the voice in their head, when they're reading it, they're going to read it with the voice in their head, not our voice. So what I see is a future where, a bit like Netflix right now, you can change the language.
Yeah.
I see that we'll be able to...
A little drop-down box is going to come next to your book when you buy it and you choose.
Yes, because why shouldn't someone be able to listen to your voice read my audiobook if I can license that? So as we speak, I'm literally working right next to me here is the World Intellectual Property Office, this thing on AI, and I'm writing notes about this. I'm like, this is where this is going.
Wow.
The deep fake technology is bad and also good. This is the same technology. So in December 2019, Samuel L. Jackson was the first voice synth to be used on the Alexa. You can ask, I think something like, let me talk to Sam or something like that, if you Google it. But that is not just recordings of his voice, it's actually voice synth. And that's where I think we're going. And so what I see is a future where I could just narrate my audiobook, or I could write my drama, and then I could license these different voices and put them all together so that I can create audio dramas myself.
Wow.
So I think that's pretty exciting. But what was, again, interesting in Frankfurt was the question was asked, so will the publishing industry use AI voices? And the English lot, the UK and the Americans were like, no, definitely not. We'd never do that because we've got all these ex-BBC people and we've got all these voice talents that can do it.
Is that the reason? Is that the reason for the resistance, kind of protectionism of actors and performers?
Partly. But it's a 60-year ecosystem that has developed. But then the lady from Latin America piped up and said, well, we're interested because we have nothing. We have no ecosystem of audio. If we want all our books turned into all the dialects for all the Latin American countries,
they're going to need it.
They need AI. And it's the same, like to think about India, all the different languages that they have in India, or just all the languages in the world. And the fact is, in the British English and American English ecosystem, for sure, we have an established audio market and established voice talent. But if you look at the explosion of content across the world, we want to have our work available in these other languages. So yeah, very, very exciting times. And I think this will also come together with the AI translation, which is getting better and better. So all of this, I think, will come together. So the question for everyone listening and for you guys is, what do you own? Back to IP. What do you own? If you sign a contract for any kind of exclusivity for, let's say, 7 years, what is going to change in 7 years? Or if you've signed a contract for the term of copyright 70 years after you die, what are you going to miss out on? If you sign it for all languages worldwide, are you really selling books in all those markets? So this is where I want people to think, oh, people can think, oh, she's talking silly nonsense. There'll be nothing like that for at least a decade. Well, I'm 45. I'm still intending to be here in a decade.
Yes.
So signing something for the term of copyright is completely crazy, obviously, unless there's a big payout and you can go write some other things. But I just want people to consider what might be coming. And if you think about the last decade of self-publishing, what we didn't know a decade ago is crazy. And the ecosystem we didn't have. I mean, life has moved on.
Presumably at some point, somebody is just going to have such a realistic synthesized voice and upload it. And obviously they'll have to be in breach of their contract, but just to prove the fact that it's as good as an actor. And so the audio will it'll become a scandal. But
yeah, this has already happened with the deep fakes. This is why this is a now thing. The deep fakes of 2019, you can just Google it. Make sure you Google the right thing, because there's some naughty versions. But there's on Instagram, there's Donald Trump, there's Mark Zuckerberg's is hilarious because he's like, I own all your data and I'm going to do evil things with it. They've done Kim Kardashian, they did Boris Johnson, praising Jeremy Corbyn. So the deep fakes have shown that the voice synth area it's already there, which is why the Intellectual Property Office and things are looking at, what do we do? Should we just ban it? And my opinion is you cannot ban this stuff.
No.
You have to license it. So the best thing to do is you and I, because our voice is out there, we could easily be deep faked right now. But the fact is, if we can license our voices, maybe people will pay us to use them, in the same way that having ebooks available on every single platform actually lessens the chance of being pirated, because there's no need to pirate if the work is already there for people to actually buy. So this is why I'm so passionate about licensing and about allowing the use of creativity and technology to work together to make a very exciting future.
that is exciting. So I could have my voice synthesized and become a voiceover artist in a sort of fire and forget method. I just do the synthesizing once, have it all copyrighted, and then hope that people choose my voice when they're browsing through
Exactly. And this is the thing. So you and I, like, together right now, we're not competing for the same voice space. I mean, I'm who I am and you're who you are, and our voice print is very different. And so, yes, people might choose you and me. Mark Lefebvre has had his voice double done. He's a Canadian guy. We can have all these different voices, and then we can use them to create more things. So I know some people feel very negative about this stuff, and some people listening might feel this is bad, but in the last decade, what I've seen is that we make a living from technology, the mesh of creativity and technology. So that's why I see that we need more licensing, not more banning, in order to make this good for everyone.
Yeah, and it's always a case with technology developing when it takes the role. If it's been a role of humans before, there's always this period of adjustment, and people instinctively don't like it. It's a bit like actually the cars, autonomous cars now. So there's a lot of resistance to them. And the first person who was killed by an autonomous car, and every time someone's in an accident with an autonomous car, there's outrage about it, ignoring the fact that 3,500 people are killed by humans in cars every year, and we don't bat an eyelid. So it is a case of adjusting, isn't it?
It is. But also, I just want to also add that there will still be room for human narration. But what I see is a stratification of product, in the same way that you might buy, get a KU fiction book that you then give back, that you borrow, or you read the pages and then it goes back. That's different from buying a hardback that you want to keep on your shelf. Those are different things you do in different situations. And in the same way, I think a human narrated audiobook with all of the human side of that, it could be have a sticker on it like human narrated, that will be a premium product. So it might be that there's different versions. There might be a human narrated one, and then maybe there's an AI narrated one, which is, you know, a 99-cent product as opposed to a $10 product. So I see that the audiobook, like our ebooks and the print books and all the different formats we can do, the audiobook is going to split into these multiple products, and that will hopefully bring us more revenue streams, which is very exciting.
Brilliant. Well, you better tell us a little bit about the book, where people can find it, and in the multitude of formats you're releasing it in.
Yes, exactly. Well, it's available everywhere.
Yeah.
So yes, audio for authors, audiobooks, podcasting, and voice technology. So we've talked mainly about audiobooks, but the second, actually a massive chunk of the book is about podcasting. Not just if you want to have your own podcast, but mostly if you want to get on podcasts, and using podcasting for marketing, all the things that authors should be doing in a voice first area. And to reach people like me, basically you have to be in audio. And then the third section is about voice technology, so voice assistants, optimizing for voice, which has hit my website. I don't know about yours, but October 2019, the Google BERT algorithm change means that much of 1 in 10 searches were impacted on the internet, and it's skewing towards voice search. So this again was part of my 2019 sledgehammer over the head, must deal with this stuff. And also the AI side and the future of voice. I talk about that as well. So yeah, it's available in all those formats, in all the usual places.
And when is it released now? Or it said March, did you?
6th of March 2020. And this is another little tip for audio production. Like, even if we're so used to just finishing the book and then uploading it, but if you're going to try and get the audiobook up at the same time, you have to leave a bit of lead time. So we're recording this a few weeks before that, but hopefully everything will be out 6th of March 2020.
Well, look, you can bring copies to the Self-Publishing Show live on the 9th of March and sign them.
I'm talking about something completely different. I mean, if this goes out before then, I will be wearing another hat that day.
I know, but people will want this signed copy. Although what you'll sign, I don't know, because it could be one of the many formats. Look, Joe, fantastic. It's always absorbing talking to you. I've learnt huge. I'm going to browse the book now, in particular, start thinking and planning about our own little expedition. The slight downside on our front, and this will be for people who write science fiction and epic in particular, is the word counts are very high in the books that we've bought, which does have an impact, does it not?
Oh, absolutely. Because, of course, if you think about that, let's say $400 per hour, and you have a book that's going to be 15 hours and you have 6 books, that's a lot of investment. And that's why, again, we might see far more books done with AI voices and it will just bring the cost down so much. So, and again, libraries, I think people are going to be very excited about this when they realize what it means to the ability to create and consume content and afford content. Look what we saw with books. When we had ebooks, people started consuming like 5-10 times as many books because it was available in this digital, cheaper format. So yeah, exciting times ahead for all of us. Yeah,
definitely. Well, I can see a method or process where you get the AI version of your book done, let that run for 6 months, build up some money, and pay then for a human. So maybe there's a stopgap just to get going, and different twin streams. Brilliant, fantastic. So much fun talking to you, Joe, and looking forward to seeing you in March.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
This is the Self-Publishing Show. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
There we go, Joe Penn. Always invigorating to talk to Joe, and she was full of beans at the conference, as well as you'd expect. And that book, Audio for Authors, Joanna Penn, available on Amazon now. And yes, you're right. You reminded me, actually, it wasn't just about audiobooks. It was about all sorts of different ways that audio can be used and utilized for authors, repurposing the story or that effort you put in at the beginning to create that script. And of course, you'll not like this bit, Mark, but lots of talk about AI in that interview. I know you're a skeptic of the robots, or you're scared of the robots. I don't know which it is.
I'm not scared of them, but I am a bit. I think Joanna is usually about 5 years too early. So I could be wrong. But on this, I think she was a bit early in German translation, for example. I think she'll tell you that she was a little early, and I waited a bit before I went in. I could be completely wrong about.
She might be ahead of the game. Who knows?
She might be.
Anyway, she was talking in the interview about these. You can have your voice synthesized by a computer, and then the computer can read your book. So in your voice, or you can, she predicts the day when Liam Neeson will have his voice synthesized, and you can license Liam Neeson's voice to read your book not too far away, and that will make the whole process of audiobooks a whole different ballgame.
If we were able to if we could license Anna Partridge's voice, I wouldn't need you anymore.
Yeah,
that would be excellent. And we'll look into that. Note to self.
Aha.
Synthesized Partridge.
Do you think, and there must be people living in Oklahoma
You don't know Alan Partridge?
Who have no idea who Alan Partridge is.
Oh, absolutely, definitely. But that's, they're lucky. There'll be people that come up to us at the conference and say, thank you very much for introducing Partridge. Yes. Monkey Tennis, that's...
Monkey Tennis. Well, if you've seen the Stan and Ollie film, the Laurel and Hardy film with John C. Reilly, the man playing Stan Laurel is Steve Coogan, who plays Alan Partridge. So you have to follow it back from there. That's a wonderful film, by the way, if you're looking for films to watch. Okay, good. Well, that's it for this episode. You can go off and read that Joe Penn book. You can take to heart what we're talking to you about at the moment, which is not to be too downhearted about the very unsettling and difficult times that we're going through, and try and keep steady, keep focused on your future. Control the things that you can control, and try not to be too anxious about the things that we don't have control about. I know, easier said than done, but with still good advice. Good. Okay, that's it. Mark, I can see you're starting to look at your phone now. It's that sort of time. And don't forget, from where we're speaking now, it's Mother's Day in a couple of days.
Yes, I've got to go and, of course, my kids can't go to the shop, so if I don't go and get a Mother's Day card, Lucy won't get one, and then I'll be in the doghouse. So, I need to go and do that.
I'm in isolation, so
I'm risking infection. That's how much
you love her.
I love my family. I'm risking infection for a Mother's Day card.
Good. Well, hopefully it's not a very final one, but I'm going to say that it's a goodbye from him.
And a goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Get show notes, the podcast archive, and free resources to boost your writing career at selfpublishingshow.com. Join our thriving Facebook group at selfpublishingshow.com/Facebook. Support the show at patreon.com/selfpublishingshow. And join us next week for more help and inspiration so that you can make your mark as a successful indie author. Publishing is changing, so get your words into the world and join the revolution with the Self-Publishing Show.